Captain Sarah Chun adjusted her rifle scope for the third time in 10 minutes, watching the enemy convoy snake through the valley below. The morning mist clung to the mountains of Afghanistan like a ghostly shroud, but it wouldn't hide the Taliban fighters much longer. Her radio crackled with static before Colonel Morrison's voice cut through the interference. Viper 1, this is command. Intelligence reports indicate enemy reinforcements approaching your position from the east. Orders are to withdraw immediately to Rally Point Charlie. Sarah pressed her lips together, studying the terrain through her binoculars. 6 months of tracking this particular cell had led to this moment. The convoy carried weapons shipments that would arm insurgents across 3 provinces. Her team of 12 Rangers had spent weeks positioning themselves for this ambush, and now headquarters wanted them to abandon the mission because of unconfirmed reinforcements. Command, this is Viper 1. We have clear sight lines and optimal positioning. Request permission to engage target before withdrawal. Static filled the airwaves for several seconds. Negative, Viper 1. Orders are explicit. Withdraw now? That's a direct command. Sergeant Martinez crawled up beside her, his weathered face grim. Captain, the boys are ready. We've got claymores positioned along their route, and Johnson has a clear shot at their lead vehicle. This is our best chance. Sarah knew Martinez was right. Intelligence had been chasing this ghost convoy for months. The Taliban commander, known only as the engineer, had evaded every attempt to locate him. Now he was less than 800 meters away, completely unaware of the Rangers hidden in the rocky outcropping above the pass. She keyed her radio again. Command, we have positive identification on high-value target. The engineer is in the lead vehicle. This may be our only opportunity. Colonel Morrison's response came quickly, his tone sharp with authority. Captain Chun, you have your orders. Begin immediate withdrawal. That convoy is bait for a larger force. Satellite imagery shows at least 200 hostiles converging on your position. The convoy below had stopped. Sarah watched through her scope as Taliban fighters dismounted from their vehicles, automatic weapons in hand. They were checking something, possibly scanning for threats. In 30 minutes, they would disappear into the maze of caves that honeycomb the mountains, taking their weapons cache with them. Ma'am, whispered Corporal Davis from his position 20 meters to her right. If we're moving, we need to go now. Those vehicles down there are starting to spread out. Sarah made a decision that would define her career and possibly end her life. She switched her radio to the team frequency, cutting off the command channel. All units, this is Viper 1. We have one shot at completing this mission. Martinez, initiate ambush sequence in 60 seconds. Johnson, prepare to disable the lead vehicle on my mark. Everyone else, maintain position until we confirm target elimination. The next few minutes unfolded like scenes from a carefully choreographed ballet of violence. Sarah's team had drilled this scenario dozens of times. Each ranger knew exactly where to position themselves, when to fire, and how to extract under pressure. But no amount of training could prepare them for what happened next. The first explosion echoed through the valley as Johnson's rifle found its mark. The lead vehicle erupted in flames, sending Taliban fighters scrambling for cover behind rocks and disabled trucks. Martinez triggered the claymores in sequence, creating a wall of deadly shrapnel that caught the enemy in a devastating crossfire. But Sarah's radio was already buzzing with frantic messages from command. Viper 1, respond immediately. We have confirmed movement of large hostile force. Your position will be overrun in less than 20 minutes. Through her scope, Sarah saw the engineer stumbling away from the burning vehicle, clutching his left arm. This was their moment. She steadied her breathing, calculated wind speed and distance, and squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect, but, at the last second, the target dove behind a boulder. Damn, she muttered, working the bolt on her rifle. Martinez, we need to move down there and confirm the kill. Captain, that's suicide. Martinez replied over the comm. We've stirred up a hornet's nest. Time to go. But Sarah had spotted something that changed everything. The engineer wasn't hiding behind the boulder. He was manning a radio, calling for the reinforcements that command had warned about. If her team withdrew now, those reinforcements would pursue them across 50 miles of hostile territory. She made another command decision that would haunt her superiors for months. Instead of retreating, She ordered her team to establish defensive positions among the rocks. They were going to hold this pass and prevent the Taliban from organizing a coordinated pursuit. All units, establish perimeter defense. We're not running from this fight. The radio exploded with protests from headquarters. Colonel Morrison's voice was barely controlled rage. Captain Chun, you are directly disobeying orders. Withdraw immediately or face court-martial. Sarah removed her radio and handed it to Martinez. Tell them we're having communication problems. What followed was 45 minutes of the most intense combat Sarah had ever experienced. Wave after wave of Taliban fighters poured into the valley, only to be met by precisely placed rifle fire from the Rangers positioned in the rocks above. Sarah moved from position to position, coordinating fields of fire and redistributing ammunition as her soldiers began to run low. The turning point came when Corporal Davis spotted enemy fighters attempting to flank their position from a dry riverbed to the south. Sarah realized that the engineer was still alive and directing the assault with tactical intelligence that impressed even her. He's good, she admitted to Martinez as they watched enemy forces probe their defenses for weaknesses. But he's made one mistake. What's that, Captain? He's fighting our kind of battle now. Sarah had trained her Rangers for exactly this scenario. A small, highly skilled force holding superior terrain against a larger, but less disciplined enemy. Every soldier in her unit was an expert marksman, capable of engaging targets at extreme range with devastating accuracy. More importantly, they had something the Taliban fighters lacked: absolute trust in their leader and each other. As the sun climbed higher, the battle intensified. The Taliban fighters, frustrated by their inability to dislodge the Rangers, began taking increasingly desperate risks. Sarah exploited every tactical error, directing her team's fire with surgical precision. Enemy casualties mounted while her Rangers remained untouched in their rocky fortress. But ammunition was becoming a critical issue. Each Ranger had started with 210 rounds, plus additional magazines for the squad's machine gun. After 90 minutes of continuous combat, they were down to their last clips. Captain, Martinez called out during a brief lull in the fighting. We need to talk about extraction. We can't hold this position much longer. Sarah knew he was right, but she also knew something her sergeant didn't. Through her binoculars, she could see dust clouds on the horizon, the telltale sign of approaching vehicles. But were they Taliban reinforcements or American rescue forces? The answer came in the form of Apache helicopters appearing over the eastern ridge. Sarah grabbed her radio and switched to the emergency frequency. Any friendly aircraft? This is Viper 1. We have troops in contact and need immediate support. Viper 1, this is Guardian 2-3. We see your position. Are you the unit that refused withdrawal orders? Sarah hesitated for only a moment. Affirmative, Guardian. We have high-value target cornered and need support to complete mission. The Apache pilot's response surprised her. Roger that, Viper 1. We're here to extract your team, but if you've got actionable intelligence, we can provide close air support first. Looking down into the valley, Sarah could see the engineer still coordinating his forces from behind the boulder. The weapons convoy was destroyed, but the man himself represented years of Taliban planning and operations. This was bigger than following orders or preserving her career. Guardian 2-3, request gun run on coordinates I'm about to transmit. High-value target is directing enemy forces from position behind large boulder at grid reference. The helicopter's chain gun spoke with mechanical precision, turning the engineer's hiding place into a cloud of dust and shattered rock. When the dust settled, Sarah could see through her scope that the Taliban commander would never threaten another American patrol. But victory came with a price that Sarah was only beginning to understand. Her radio crackled with an incoming message from Colonel Morrison, and his voice carried the weight of military justice. Captain Chun, you will return to base immediately for debriefing. Consider yourself relieved of command pending formal investigation. The military courtroom at Fort Bragg was sterile and intimidating, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows across the polished floor. Captain Sarah Chun sat at the defendant's table, her dress uniform crisp despite the weight of the charges against her. Disobedience to direct orders, reckless endangerment of personnel, and conduct unbecoming an officer. Any one of these could end her 12-year military career. Colonel Morrison sat in the witness chair, his testimony painting Sarah as a rogue officer who valued personal glory over military discipline. Captain Chun received explicit orders to withdraw from an untenable position. Instead, she chose to engage a superior enemy force, putting her entire unit at risk for what can only be described as a personal vendetta. Sarah's military defense attorney, Major Rebecca Walsh, had warned her that the case would be difficult. The facts were undisputed. Sarah had disobeyed direct orders and engaged the enemy against explicit instructions. Military law was clear about the chain of command, regardless of tactical outcomes. Your Honor, Major Walsh addressed the military judge. While my client did technically disobey orders, the tactical situation required immediate adaptation. Captain Chin's actions prevented a significant weapons shipment from reaching insurgent forces and eliminated a high-value target that had eluded capture for over 2 years. The prosecutor, Lieutenant Colonel James Harper, stood to object. The defendant's results do not justify her actions. Military discipline exists for a reason. If every field commander could ignore orders based on their personal judgment, our entire command structure would collapse. General Patricia Hayes, the presiding judge, had seen thousands of courts-martialed during her 30-year career. She understood the tension between military discipline and tactical flexibility, but the law was designed to prevent exactly this kind of freelancing. Major Walsh, does your client wish to make a statement regarding these charges? Sarah rose, her voice steady despite the career-ending implications of her words. Your Honor, I accept full responsibility for my actions. I disobeyed direct orders because I believed the mission required it. My Rangers trusted me to make the right tactical decision, and I would make the same choice again under identical circumstances. The honesty was both admirable and damaging. Sarah had essentially confessed to the charges, while simultaneously indicating she would repeat the offense. General Hayes made notes on her legal pad, already formulating the verdict that would reshape Sarah's life. But outside the courtroom, a different kind of battle was taking place. The story of Captain Chin's unauthorized mission had reached the media, and public opinion was divided. Military families supported her tactical decision-making, while other commentators criticized her defiance of authority. More importantly, her Rangers had refused to criticize their former commander. Sergeant Martinez, when called to testify, stated under oath that he would follow Captain Chun into combat again without hesitation. She saved our lives that day, he told the court. Command wanted us to run into a Taliban ambush. Captain Chun kept us alive and completed the mission. The trial lasted 3 days, but the verdict was predetermined by military law and precedent. General Hayes found Sarah guilty on all charges, though she acknowledged the tactical success of the mission. The sentence was dismissal from service, reduction in rank, and forfeiture of all benefits, a complete destruction of Sarah's military career. 6 months after the court-martial, Sarah was working as a security consultant for a private firm in Virginia. The adjustment to civilian life was difficult for someone who had spent her entire adult life in uniform. Her apartment was sparse, furnished with the practical efficiency of military quarters rather than the comfortable chaos of civilian homes. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while she was reviewing security protocols for a government contractor. The voice was unfamiliar, but the authority was unmistakable. Ms. Chun, this is General William Crawford from the Pentagon. I need to speak with you about a matter of national security. Sarah had heard of General Crawford. He was the deputy director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, a man whose decisions affected operations across the globe. Why he would contact a disgraced former captain was beyond her understanding. General, I'm no longer in the military. I think you may have the wrong person. Ms. Chun, I'm very aware of your current status. That's exactly why I'm calling. We have a situation that requires your particular expertise and, frankly, your willingness to operate outside normal channels. The meeting took place in a nondescript office building in Arlington, the kind of place where government contractors disappeared into bureaucratic anonymity. General Crawford was a tall man with gray hair and intelligent eyes that suggested he had seen the best and worst of military operations. Ms. Chun, what I'm about to tell you is classified at the highest levels. 3 weeks ago, we lost contact with a special operations team in Syria. Intelligence suggests they were captured by a terrorist cell that has been using advanced torture techniques to extract operational intelligence. Sarah listened without speaking, already understanding where this conversation was heading. The problem, Crawford continued, is that this terrorist cell is led by someone you're familiar with. Hamid al-Rashid, known in Afghanistan as the engineer's lieutenant. He survived your attack on the convoy and has been planning revenge against American forces ever since. The room seemed to grow colder as Sarah processed this information. Her unauthorized mission had eliminated the engineer, but his second-in-command had escaped to Syria, where he was now using captured American soldiers as bait for a larger trap. General, with respect, I'm not sure why you're telling me this. I'm a civilian security consultant now. Crawford leaned forward, his voice dropping to a whisper. Because al-Rashid specifically requested that you be part of any rescue operation. He's holding those soldiers as leverage to draw you into Syria, where he can capture or kill the American officer who destroyed his mentor. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the officer conditioning. So this is personal. Completely personal. Al-Rashid has made it clear that he will execute the captured soldiers unless you lead the rescue operation. He wants you to walk into his trap, and he's willing to kill American soldiers to make it happen. The ethical complexity of the situation was staggering. Sarah's unauthorized mission in Afghanistan had created a personal vendetta that was now threatening innocent lives. Al-Rashid was using captured soldiers as bait, knowing that American military doctrine would never sanction sending a disgraced former officer into hostile territory. General, I assume the official military response is to refuse his terms and attempt a standard rescue operation. Crawford nodded grimly. That's correct. But our intelligence suggests that al-Rashid has prepared for conventional rescue attempts. He's moved the prisoners to a location that would require significant military action to penetrate, action that would likely result in the execution of the hostages. Sarah was beginning to understand the impossible position that Crawford was describing. The military couldn't officially sanction her involvement, but they also couldn't ignore the possibility that she might be the only person capable of reaching the captured soldiers. What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to volunteer for an off-the-books mission that doesn't officially exist. You would be inserted into Syria with a small support team, locate the prisoners, and extract them before al-Rashid can carry out his threats. The legal and ethical implications were enormous. Sarah would be operating without official sanction, in violation of international law, with no guarantee of support if the mission failed. If captured, the United States would disavow any knowledge of her presence in Syria. But 4 American soldiers were depending on her decision. General, if I agree to this mission, I need complete tactical authority. No interference from headquarters, no withdrawal orders that compromise the operation. Crawford smiled for the first time during their conversation. Ms. Chun, that's exactly why we need you. Your willingness to ignore orders when the situation requires it. And if the mission succeeds? Officially, it never happened. Unofficially, for soldiers come home to their families. Sarah stared out the window at the Washington skyline, thinking about the Rangers who had trusted her judgment in Afghanistan and the soldiers who were now paying the price for her success. The choice was clear, even if the consequences were not. When do we leave? The Syrian desert was a furnace at noon, the sun beating down mercilessly on the rocky landscape that stretched toward the horizon like an endless brown ocean. Sarah Chun lay motionless behind a ridge overlooking the abandoned oil facility where intelligence suggested the captured soldiers were being held. Through her scope, she could see armed guards patrolling the perimeter with the casual confidence of men who believed they controlled the battlefield. Her support team consisted of only 3 volunteers: Master Sergeant David Kim, a demolitions expert who had served 2 tours in Syria; Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, a communications specialist with advanced Arabic language skills; and Corporal Jake Thompson, a medic whose steady hands had saved dozens of lives during urban combat operations in Iraq. Visual confirmation on target building. Sarah whispered into her throat microphone. I count 12 hostiles on perimeter patrol, possibly more inside the main structure. Sergeant Kim crawled up beside her, his desert camouflage blending perfectly with the sun-baked rocks. Motion sensors are positioned around the facility, but they're commercial grade. I can disable them without triggering alarms. The mission planning had taken 2 weeks of intensive preparation. General Crawford had provided satellite imagery, communication intercepts, and detailed intelligence on al-Rashid's operational methods. But no amount of planning could account for the psychological complexity of walking directly into a trap designed specifically for her. Al-Rashid wanted revenge for his mentor's death, and he was using American soldiers as bait to draw Sarah into Syrian territory where he could capture or kill her. The terrorist leader had made his intentions clear through intercepted communications. He would execute one prisoner every 24 hours until Sarah arrived for a personal confrontation. Santos, any communication from the prisoners? Sarah asked through the radio. Negative, ma'am. Radio silence from the target building. But thermal imaging confirms 4 heat signatures in the basement level, separated from the guards upstairs. Sarah studied the facility through her binoculars, noting the defensive positions and escape routes that al-Rashid had prepared. The building was a former oil pumping station, its concrete walls thick enough to stop small arms fire, and its elevated position providing clear sight lines in all directions. But Sarah had spent years studying urban combat tactics, and she could see weaknesses that al-Rashid had overlooked. The facility's water supply came from a single pipeline that ran underground from a well located 800 meters to the north. The electrical system relied on diesel generators that were housed in a separate building with minimal security. Kim, how long would it take you to disable their power and water supply? The demolitions expert studied the facility layout through his own scope. 20 minutes to reach the utilities, 5 minutes to set charges, another 20 to return to overwatch position. Sarah was already formulating an assault plan that would exploit al-Rashid's psychological need for personal confrontation. The terrorist leader expected her to attempt a stealthy rescue operation, but Sarah intended to announce her presence and force him to respond to her tactical initiative. Change of plans, she announced to her team. We're going to make this personal. Thompson, the medic, looked confused. Ma'am, that sounds like we're walking into his trap. We are, Sarah replied. But we're going to spring it on our terms. The plan was audacious in its simplicity. Sarah would approach the facility openly, allowing al-Rashid to capture her as he intended. But her team would use the distraction to infiltrate the building and locate the prisoners. When al-Rashid focused his attention on his primary target, Kim would destroy the facility's structural supports while Santos coordinated extraction. At sunset, Sarah walked down the ridge toward the oil facility with her hands raised, her rifle slung across her back in a gesture of apparent surrender. She knew that al-Rashid's men were watching her through scopes, tracking her movement, and reporting to their leader that the American officer had finally arrived. The facility gates opened, and 6 armed men emerged to escort her inside. Sarah noticed their tactical equipment was superior to typical insurgent forces: night vision goggles, advanced communication systems, and body armor that suggested significant financial backing. Al-Rashid was waiting in the main control room, a tall man with intelligent eyes and a neatly trimmed beard. He wore Western clothing rather than traditional robes, and his English was accented but precise. Captain Chun, welcome to Syria. I have been looking forward to this meeting for many months. Sarah remained silent, studying the room's layout and counting the number of armed guards. 8 men with automatic weapons, positioned to prevent any escape attempt. But Sarah wasn't planning to escape, at least not yet. You killed my mentor, al-Rashid continued, circling her like a predator examining prey. Ahmad was a brilliant strategist who dedicated his life to driving American forces from our homeland. Your unauthorized attack destroyed years of planning and preparation. Your mentor was a terrorist who murdered civilians, Sarah replied calmly. I eliminated a legitimate military target. Al-Rashid struck her across the face with casual violence, but Sarah had expected the blow and rode with the impact. Her team needed time to reach the prisoners, and every minute she could keep al-Rashid talking was a minute closer to mission success. You Americans think you can invade our countries with impunity, al-Rashid said, his voice rising with anger. But tonight you will learn that actions have consequences. Below them, Kim was moving through the facility's basement level with lethal efficiency. His demolition training allowed him to disable security systems without triggering alarms, and his combat experience guided him through the building's blind spots. Santos had reached the prisoner's location and was cutting through the steel door with a compact torch. The captured soldiers were alive, but injured, with evidence of interrogation that made her jaw clench with suppressed rage. "Can you move?" she whispered to the ranking prisoner, a special forces sergeant with a badly bruised face. "We can move," he replied. "But they've got motion sensors throughout this building. Any movement will trigger alarms." Santos smiled grimly. "Not anymore. My demolitions expert disabled their security system 20 minutes ago." Meanwhile, Sarah was enduring al-Rashid's psychological torture with practiced stoicism. The terrorist leader wanted her to break, to show fear or desperation that would satisfy his need for revenge. But Sarah had been trained to resist interrogation, and she used every technique to keep his attention focused on her. "Your soldiers will die tonight," al-Rashid told her. "But first, you will watch them suffer as my mentor suffered in his final moments." Sarah keyed her hidden transmitter twice, the signal for immediate extraction. Within seconds, Kim's demolition charges detonated throughout the facility, cutting electrical power and creating chaos among the guards. In the darkness that followed, Sarah executed the hand-to-hand combat techniques that had been drilled into her at Fort Benning. Al-Rashid reached for his sidearm, but Sarah was faster, disarming him with a precise strike to his wrist before driving her elbow into his solar plexus. The control room erupted in gunfire as al-Rashid's guards attempted to locate targets in the sudden darkness. But Sarah had memorized their positions during her conversation with their leader, and she moved between them with lethal precision. Thompson appeared in the doorway, his night vision goggles allowing him to engage the confused guards with surgical accuracy. "Ma'am, we have the prisoners." Santos is leading them to the extraction point. Sarah zip-tied al-Rashid's hands behind his back and dragged him toward the exit. The terrorist leader was a valuable intelligence asset, and his capture would provide insight into other operations targeting American forces. But as they reached the facility's main corridor, Sarah realized that al-Rashid had prepared one final surprise. Motion sensors throughout the building suddenly activated, and automated gun turrets descended from hidden ceiling panels. "You cannot escape," al-Rashid laughed despite his restraints. "This facility is designed to kill anyone who attempts to breach its defenses." The gun turrets began firing with mechanical precision, forcing Sarah and Thompson to take cover behind concrete pillars. But Sarah had anticipated this possibility and prepared a countermeasure that al-Rashid couldn't have predicted. "Kim, execute Option Bravo," she called into her radio. The demolitions expert had planted shaped charges throughout the facility's support structure, and his response was immediate. The building began to collapse in a controlled demolition that destroyed the automated defense systems while creating a clear path to the exit. Sarah and Thompson ran through the collapsing facility, dragging al-Rashid between them as concrete dust filled the air. Behind them, the building's upper floors pancaked downward in a thunderous crash that could be heard for miles. They reached the extraction point as helicopters appeared over the horizon. Not the official military aircraft that would have triggered international incidents, but unmarked civilian contractors flying under radar coverage. 6 months later, Sarah received an unmarked envelope containing a single photograph for American soldiers reunited with their families at a military base in Germany. There was no return address, no official recognition, and no record that the mission had ever occurred. But tucked inside the envelope was a handwritten note from General Crawford. "The President would like to thank you for your service. Your commission has been restored, with promotion to major and assignment to a classified unit that specializes in unconventional operations." Sarah stared at the commission papers for a long time before filing them in her desk drawer. She had learned that sometimes the most important missions were the ones that never officially happened, carried out by soldiers who understood that true service meant doing what was right regardless of the personal cost. The war against terrorism would continue, fought in shadows by people whose names would never appear in history books. But for American soldiers were alive because one officer had refused to abandon her responsibility to bring them home.